We're doing the sellers panel. We're going to talk to 3 sellers of their companies who recently sold their company and are going to share some insight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let these gentlemen introduce themselves, but we've got Lior Shiff on the end, Michael Pohl, and John Passfield on this end, and I'll let you guys introduce yourselves. Your mic's working? Everything? Good?
Hello.
Lior, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us what you do.
My name is Lior Shiff. I'm co-founder and managing director of Product Madness. Product Madness is a company that was established almost 6 years ago out of San Francisco. We're in the business of developing social and mobile casino games, so virtual currency-based casino games. Roughly 6 months ago, the company has been sold to Aristocrat, which is a publicly traded Australian company. And I guess I'm here to talk about that.
My name is Michael Pohl. I am the CEO of Gloops International, based in San Francisco. Our parent company is now Nexon, which is a very successful online game publisher from Korea, which is headquartered in Japan. We have approximately 550 people working with us and studios in Tokyo, Ho Chi Minh City, and San Francisco.
Thanks, Michael. John?
And I'm John Passfield. I'm from Right Pedal Studios. Right now I'm working on a games accelerator program in Australia, but the company I'm talking about was that we sold to RockU is Three Bloke Studios. And yeah, so that's my background.
All right, great. So tell me a bit about the process that you went through. How long was the process from start to finish? And what sort of stumbling blocks did you find through that process, John?
Okay, well, this is, I've got my notes here because this is 2011, so I've got all my details here. Our process was pretty quick. We sold from first offer was March 2011, and we actually sold and closed in May 2011. So it was 2.5 months from start to go. And we had a number of companies interested in acquisition for us, and RockU was the one we felt that we connected with and had the right sort of on the same wavelength with those guys. So we sold to that company.
So did you have all the buyers coming to you at the same time
to
buy you?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because we Three Blokes actually began as it was doing a lot of casual games, doing hidden object games. So we sort of transitioned into the Facebook social game media. So we're at that point when it was a bit of a frenzy happening with Zynga was looking at us purely, I think, as employees, taking us over as employees.
Yeah.
We had a VC company and another publisher, but yeah, they reached out to us, which was really interesting because being in Australia, oftentimes you had to go to the US to get your business. But so it was refreshing to have it sort of come to us, which I think speaks about the marketplace and where social games were back in 2011.
Did you have funding at the time, or did you fund it yourself?
No, we're all completely bootstrapped. So
completely.
It was all completely run off the smell of an oily rag. And literally, the company was at one point literally 3 blokes developing Facebook games. We grew up to about 11 at the time of acquisition. And the happy ending of the story, because when we were acquired, we actually were with RockU for, I think, about 6 months before they decided to pivot and close down a lot of their studios, and we were one of the victims of that, unfortunately. But the silver lining of that was that the team was quickly taken over by Kixeye, and the team now is working on a Vega Conflict.
So are they still with Kixeye?
Still with Kixeye, yeah. So which is great, and we actually George Fiddler was our GM, who Michael knows. We brought on before the acquisition, and so George helped us sort of navigate the whole process as well. And but he's running the studio in Australia, and now they're up to, I think, well over 30 people. So
good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Lior, tell us a bit about your process. How were you funded at what stage, and did you have multiple buyers at the table?
Sure. So yeah, our process was took us roughly 8 months.
Yeah.
And we had an organized process. So we took professional advisors. So we went to few that we negotiated with and getting a few term sheets, going through due diligence with a few, and then eventually after 8 months signing a deal with one partner, with Aristocrats.
Yeah. We'll get back to how you did it the first time in a minute.
Sure.
We'll do that in a sec. Michael, tell us a little bit about how long the process took and your investment, if you had investment and that sort of thing.
Real interesting. The company grew at a pace that few expected. Starting about 3 years ago, the company was doing primarily online advertising and business cards and such. And when DNA established the MobiGate platform, we were one of the very first people to get onto that platform, and within a very short period, we're doing revenues in excess of $300 million a year, which was, fabulously profitable. As far as the acquisition, all the usual suspects had come to the table, and the process happened very quickly. It wasn't as if there was some auction. We sort of knew who the targets would be. The process started in June of 2012 and closed in September. So it happened very quickly.
That's amazing.
It was a very, tightly held company, so there wasn't a lot of equity participants that had to be taken care of. But for the most part, Nexon was just a perfect and great complement to what we were doing. They have struggled a little bit in the mobile space. So when we had this very formidable group of people building games, which are now 20 strong and over 500 people working, they saw it as a great complement to what they were doing. And then our global expansion was something that they were very interested in as well.
Yeah. So John had a few missteps there, and fortunately it turned out well. But your integration has gone well, Michael?
As far as integration, it's been great. I will say that, at every stage of the relationship, we just find out more and more interesting things about Nexon. It's a wonderfully run company with extremely bright people who have, kind of a very sophisticated understanding of the market. We are their mobile presence, which is exciting for us. A tremendous amount of business development activities as well as M&A in all territories across the globe. What was most interesting is having spent 8 years at Electronic Arts running one of their largest studios in Redwood Shores, as you know, Jim.
Yeah.
As I peeled back the onion of Nexon, it became very apparent that these guys were very buttoned up, highly professional and well organized. So it's been nothing but great as far as the integration process.
Okay, great. Now, Lior, you were telling me earlier today, because after I presented some of the do's and don'ts of going through the process, you had tried it one time and it didn't work out. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So in 2010, we've been approached by a couple of companies that were interested in acquiring our company, so we pretty much went through that process ourselves. And first of all, it took away our focus. Actually, my co-founder Jose is sitting here as well, and the two of us were really running that process, and it was super time-consuming on our behalf. And that process ended up actually the day before signing. This is after spending obviously hundreds of thousands of dollars in lawyers and accounting and tax, and this is after opening the champagnes and celebrating with the potential buyer. They came to us and wanted to change the terms, and we said no. But really, we lost pretty much a year just dealing with that process. So when opportunities came knocking again second time, a couple of years later, we said this time we cannot afford losing focus around what's happening in the company. This is why we went and got professional advisors to help us with that process.
Yeah, so it worked out much better. But doing it yourself is not advisable. You just take away focus from the business. It drops off, and you lose a year or so, and unsuccessful. Was the counter when they tried to renegotiate? Was a significant difference in the deal?
Yeah, yes, it was. I think what happened, obviously since we were unexperienced managing that process, but by that point of time, it really squeezed us because they knew how much we spent into this process and how much money we had in the bank. And they knew everything, right? And they just felt that they can squeeze us, and they were wrong. Eventually it turned out to be a great event for us, because eventually we had a much better outcome a couple of years later, but it didn't feel that way at the time.
It would have, yeah. So it would have been great if you could have fallen back on another buyer or two at that time and say, okay, we're out of our no shop, and have another buyer come to the table. Were there other buyers at the table, or just too late?
It was. We had a few buyers that we started the process with, but we were so deep with those guys.
Yeah.
So after basically we got a couple of term sheets, we decided to go with them, and then it was just a very long due diligence process that was very consuming, and they were the only guys that went through that process.
Yeah, so what I said earlier about the time is not on a seller's side. So the process of get it done quickly. Otherwise, there's people change their mind and so on.
Jim, just something to add.
Yeah.
I think the management team in that particular instance has to be given a lot of credit, because the most difficult thing to do in a circumstance like that is to say no. You need to stand by your convictions. You need to do what's in the best interests of your company. And being able to stand up under that pressure is quite impressive.
That is impressive. Your ability to say no is incredible. And it's good, and it turned out well. So you sold to Aristocrat. And how's that integration going?
It's going very well. I think a big part of that is we spend a lot of time actually prior to signing the deal, thinking together how we're going to operate together as a merged company, and we're actually following that plan. So that really helped. And then I think since in the second time around we had quite a few buyers, and actually one of the criteria that we had for choosing who's the right buyer was obviously the commercial aspect, but not only that, it was also the culture fit. I think we had a few buyers that we felt that we will not enjoy being part of that company, or there isn't a good culture fit. And I think with Aristocrat from the get-go, they said that they want to keep us independent. They recognize the fact that we understand their business better than they understand it, and this is really what's happening. So we are trying to leverage all the synergies to minimize, I would say, the corporate aspects of things, reporting and doing accounting in slightly different ways. So there's a little bit of that, but it's not that.
Yeah. Were your deals mostly cash deals, guys, or was there earn-out, and reveal only what you can reveal? But was there a large cash component, or?
In our case, it's a mixed deal.
Yeah. Any earn-out?
Yeah, a mix of cash and earn-out. Yeah.
Little bit of earn-out. Yeah. Okay. Michael.
It was a cash deal.
Cash deal. Great. Done.
Cash and stock. So I have
Okay.
stock in Rock U. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Would have liked more cash, I think.
Okay. Good. All right. Thanks. Now, during the process, did the deal ever die? Or, I mean, in your case, Michael, this thing happened very quickly. But did you see the deal dying at any time, or?
I was close to it, but not that close to it. It was pretty, quiet. I don't think so. I think that there were a number of parties that whose best interests were served by the deal getting done, and it was just a real good fit. So I don't think there was anything that was holding those folks back.
Right. Was there a long due diligence period? It doesn't sound like it.
Most of it happened in Japan, so I didn't see much of it.
Yeah.
We had some conversations about what we were doing globally, what our global strategy was, but to that extent, no. I mean, Japan handled most of the transaction, and we just shared with them, kind of what our go-forward plan was for the U.S. and in Europe.
Okay. Lior, what about you? Due diligence-wise, were you all prepared and ready to go?
I think second time around we felt that we were significantly better prepared, but still I think we were not. We were a small company at the time of acquisition. We were roughly 40 people, and I think we were not prepared. We had a few parties going. We were going through due diligence at the same time, and those guys, they hired Ernst & Young and KWC and whoever, big firms, especially on the financial side. And we had the time. We didn't have a CFO, right? So we basically still a lot of that came to us, and was very, very tiring. I would say I think we were fairly well prepared on the legal side, very well prepared on the technical side, but not prepared enough on the financial side.
Right. Okay. John?
Yeah, we were. It was really fast as well, 2.5 months, and we had. From previous experience, we had our systems in place, accounting and everything in place. So due diligence was fairly easy. So
Good. So you were prepared.
We were prepared, which is great. The only thing we had that almost held us up was at one point halfway through we found some of our source code and assets had been used by another company without permission. So at my point there, I was kind of worried that was going to kill the deal. But so we disclosed that to the buyer to let them know this was what had happened, and they were very good, just saying, look, just settle. So we negotiated with the company that had somehow got hold of this stuff to do a licensing deal, so licensed office.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a bit of a worry for me at that point.
Yeah. Any surprises that popped up during the time frame? Michael, did you see anything that surprised you about this deal during or after?
The speed by which it happened. A large transaction like that, we're doing, close to $400 million in revenue, throwing off quite a bit of profit. The company is growing significantly.
Yeah.
I think if there was one apprehension, it was the manner in which we were adding bodies to the team, employees, at a staggering rate. So that probably gave a little bit of pause. But other than that, I think it was a decision that was made and promptly acted upon.
Okay. Leor, any surprises? Things you learned during that process that you
I'll say
never
one
expected?
thing is that it's important to have the right lawyers. I think we decided to go and work with our corporate lawyer, which who we have been working with for quite some time, and really respect and trust. But and is a guy that has some M&A experience, but he's not an M&A lawyer. And I think that actually almost killed the deal. At some point, the principals really had to jump in and kind of like make sure that the lawyers will not kill the deal, because the lawyers, it was very close to happen.
Yeah, we found in many deals that lawyers can kill deals. If the lawyers are involved in that negotiation, they can kill a deal. It's more important that they be involved in checking everything after you've decided on a deal, make that deal, get the deal done, and then get the lawyers to check it. But lawyers fight with other lawyers, and if the lawyers don't get along, and that I think happened to you, right? Is there just there's that conflict. So don't get them involved too early, but make sure you use them for the right things. That's a good lesson. I've seen it many times.
And they charge by the hour, so.
And they charge by the hour, so they tend to stretch the conflict.
So this discussion is costing a fortune.
All right, so I don't know. I wanted to go a bit more into the industry a bit. What do you see trend-wise in the business? Michael, you've been in the business a long time. You've seen a huge amount of transitions, consoles, online, mobile. So where do you think the consoles are going these days? Is it a viable business?
That's a great question. So, in my talk earlier, I kind of used the analogy that the console business is very much like the motion picture business, where you're going to spend an enormous amount of money, you're going to spend an awful lot of time developing your game. You're going to put that game on a disc in a box and then take it to retail and then cross your fingers and hope you sell it through. The analogy we use for the mobile space is very much akin to television, where you establish a presence with a game, gain an audience, listen intently to what it is that audience is saying, and then basically give them what they want, not necessarily what you think they want. And what's also great about it is that there's no inventory. The games are developed in a much shorter timeline, and the cost to develop, although these are raising as well in the mobile space, whereas we were building games for $250,000, and now I'm seeing budgets in excess of $3 million, it is a lot less risk, and there's more opportunity to put more games out there so that there are more bites at the apple. As far as the console space, I think the major players will always be there. I think there will always be a place for those big ticket games. But when we were developing console games, if your game was in the top 50 games, back in the late 90s, early 2000, you can still generate enough revenue to actually have a profit. If you're not in the top 5, 10 games, it's highly likely if you've spent in excess of $10 or $15 million, you're going to make that money back. Because it's a hit-driven business, just like the movies. So that's, I think, the most challenging part for the console guys.
That's a great analogy with movies and television. And if you build a great franchise, it can go on for years and years, and you can monopolize, you really monetize that. Whereas the console business is just that big hit movie, get that big sell-through first few weeks, and you're done.
Well, it's something that was talked about earlier. I think the young lady from Facebook, or actually maybe it was Big Fish, had said it, where the players for premium games, they spend their money and they're gone within a few months, whereas the freemium games, people now we see with Supercell success, once you've attracted a user and you're delivering on that user's kind of desires, they will stay with you. Both those games have been out well over a year now, and they continue to thrive at the top 5 of the charts.
Right.
I was also say that with your television analogy, I think it's also akin to the modern television now, where you have shows like HBO producing quality content. So once where the film industry would look down on these TV programs, you've got Boardwalk Empire and Game of Thrones, and I think we're seeing that with mobile, the number of great mobile games that are coming out. They're definitely I think you can look at them on par with. They don't have the production values, but in terms of the compellingness and people willing to spend time with them, they're up there.
Lior, what's going on with the casino space? What's going on? And we've got a lot of companies, as I said before, that are in the bricks and mortar business, are trying to get into the online business. You've got people in the online business trying to support the brands in the bricks and mortar space, and there's all sorts of talk of loyalty and connecting the bricks and mortar to online. Tell us a bit about that, and what do you see going on in the business?
Sure. So really you have, as you said, Jim, three different types of companies. You have the online gaming companies, mostly European ones, obviously since due to regulation. You have the land-based guys, in the US, Australia, and other places, and then you have the virtual currency guys like ourselves. And what you see is that all three are kind of like merging to each other, and we see our business, the virtual currency business, actually looking more and more like an online real money gaming business as far as the operation. So we do things like email marketing and VIP programs and loyalty programs and CRM and lots of things that the online guys have been doing for a while. The land-based guys, especially guys who are focused around the US market, like IGT, WMS, all those guys really looking into online as the US is going through regulation. And the best way for them at the moment, since regulation is still undergoing, is actually via social. So it's a way to get an online presence, to build a user base. And then when online is going to be regulated, probably on a state-by-state basis, they already have a starting point. So this is why you see acquisitions like ours. This is why you see acquisitions like IGT acquiring Double Down. And I think you'll see that those skill sets are kind of like merging into each other.
Yeah. So do you think that Zynga has a place in the online for money gambling business?
They already do that, right? I don't know if
Well, yeah.
it's not very well known, but they went live with an real money offering in Europe. I think maybe it was a month ago.
What about in the States when they legalized that? Do they have the capability to get approved and regulated and have the security and?
I'm not a regulation expert, but I don't know. They're definitely trying, especially with poker.
Yeah. What I find is they're very good at attracting a number of users, a number of players, and stickiness to their applications versus there's a lot of Me Too going on in online slots and online other casino games that are not that interesting and not that sticky. And so there's got to be some merging of talent or companies or something happening when they're. Do you have any additional thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So obviously Zynga Poker is dominating the virtual currency poker space. At least on iOS and Facebook. On Android, there's a few other companies, but they went live with the bingo offering and they went live with the slots offering. They both failed. There are other companies that are doing significantly better around those verticals. So I think with poker, there's definitely a network effect. There's a liquidity aspect, and in many ways, it's a winner takes it all. The same thing you can see the same thing with poker in real money with poker stars, which are really dominating the market. So I think it's very hard to compete with Zynga with virtual currency poker. But we've been doing virtual currency bingo and slots for a few years now. And for the longest time, the biggest fear was what will happen when and if Zynga will do that. And you know what they did, and nothing happened. That they I think they're doing so many different types of games. Now they do casual games, they do hardcore games, mid-core. I think they're shooting all over the place. And I think really, if you want to excel in something, you need to be focused around that. And they are definitely they're focused around so many different things, right? So you cannot. This is why they keep failing with I think most of the recent games.
Okay. Yeah. Great perspective. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. It's an interesting space and. There's a lot of talk about security and getting the customer retention and customer loyalty programs in place. So with platforms that work that I feel like I need to go back to the Win, or I need to stay at the Win, as well as play Win games, or whatever the case may be, in terms of brands. So branding, compelling loyalty programs is an interesting thing that will become more important. Okay, let's see, we're good on time. Any war stories or any other stories that you'd like to tell us about good things that you went through, or things not to do when you're going through acquisitions, and what you've seen maybe in other companies to share with the group here? John, do you have any things to do, not to do?
Yeah, I guess one of the things for us is we had I'm just looking at my notes here. Vesting. Get my notes here right. Keeping track that we had a sort of investing thing with the number of shares over a year, and we thought that we did our due diligence on RockU and looked great. They had hired up some people from EA, and they had this great 3 pillars of games they were developing, hardcore, social. And so what surprised me was we had things would vest within a year, that within 6 months they closed down the studios. That was a bit of a surprise. So I think just being prepared for what would happen if something does, within 3 months doesn't work out for whatever reason. Yeah. And with Rocky, I mean, there's many factors. There was, they had the head of games was hired by Zynga, so there was this whole exodus of talent from the company. So it was a lot of little. It was almost death by paper cuts. All those little things that happened.
Yeah, I think the main message there is, and I've seen it too, and it's happened to me personally, is that anything can happen, anything can change very quickly within the company that buys you. So I would assume the worst in terms of what could happen to that company that buys you, and make sure that upfront wise you get as much cash as possible, and maybe there's a 10% of that deal is stock or incentive or something else.
Yep.
But just assume, the statistics say that most of the time the integration of those companies, the companies between the buyer and the seller, don't work out. And if you're tied to the performance of the total company or tied to their performance, that's extremely risky. Yeah. Extremely risky, so avoid that.
The other one, and for me, there's always something new you don't know about. So one for us was we had Galactic Trader was a game that was doing okay, yeah. And Rocky was keen to take that on board. We had a 9-month exclusivity with another company for distribution. So what was interesting there was when we wanted to end the distribution agreement, the other company wanted a huge sum of money to do that. So that was a surprise to me, because I just think that plan beforehand. If you do any exclusive distribution deals, even if it's, in this case, it was no advance up front, it was just a distribution agreement, make sure there is a kill fee, or if something does happen, you never know, EA may come to you and say, we want to acquire your company for your game, and if it's exclusively on another network for another 6 months, that could kill the deal. So work out a way to say, can we buy back the distribution rights? And that was a surprise. I hadn't thought about that, and that caught us out. Luckily, we worked through that process, but it's just unnecessary sort of headache to think about that. So there's just so many things you don't know until it happens to you. So
right.
I guess that's what these panels are all about.
Yep, that's right. I mean, and the other thing that is that it used to be that you signed a 3 or 4 year employment agreement with the company that buys you. Those are going away. You need to really go into a 1.5 year, maybe a year contract, because the chances are you're going to be wanting to do something else. So don't sign a long-term agreement, really, unless it's absolutely necessary and you're in love with a company, but things change.
Well, on top of that, the sophistication of the buyer, at least in where we are today, is not what it was when you had a maturing industry like the console space. So that creates challenges both for buyer and the team that's being acquired. The other thing, and it's sort of a double-edged sword, is the companies that are being acquired, these small independent developers, they're 10, 15, 20 people. And it's not difficult for the acquiring partner just to take what they want and then shut it down. It's an effective use of their time. They get themselves a piece of intellectual property, and then kind of move it someplace else within their
Right.
large organization. When you're buying or acquiring a company that's 400 or 500, 600 people, it's a much different transaction. People are doing a lot more due diligence, at least, well, not in the case of Gloops and Nexon, but for the most part, that's what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah, make sure you have all that worked out. If you need to keep your 40 people or your 20 people, make sure that's worked out ahead of time. And in my case, so my first company, we put it in place that we said you're going to retain these people for X amount of months, and then you can do, what you need to do. We can be a consolidation. Are you going to be moving to Eastern Europe? What are you going to be doing? Make sure that's all taken care of ahead of time. And regardless of the fact that it was in writing that they weren't going to shut down the studio, they came in the third day with their HR people and tried to shut down the studio. And I had to send the guy home with a piece of paper that says you can't shut down the studio. So get it in, if that's what you plan on, make sure you get it in writing. Lior, do you have any
Yeah,
comments
I
for
wrote
him?
down three small things, but I think very practical. The first one is like, if you ever plan on selling your company, make sure that you have the ability to sign any contract that you sign in the case of an M&A event, right? So really, any contract, go towards the end is the assignment clause that typically will say, no, you're not allowed to assign. Make sure that it says that you can reassign the contract in the case of
Okay,
of,
so assignment rights, make sure
yeah,
all
so
of
that-
your agreements
all
have
your
assignment
agreements,
rights.
that's
Good
really
planning
simple
ahead.
and really
Yep.
and it really helps.
Well, it's simple for the developer to want it, whether or not the partner who's contracted them. Sometimes it gets a little iffy. I know, especially when you're dealing with licenses.
That's
That's true. I think we managed to get it in all of our contracts. It was never a big issue. But if you don't do that, it might become a big issue
Absolutely.
later down the line. The second thing is since our process was a little bit longer, we were not as lucky. I think what we learned is that obviously in the beginning of the process, that you've been asked to show projections, and what's happening is that since a process like ours was 8 months, during those 8 months, actually the prospective buyers come and say, oh, can you show us how you're performing against the projections? So keep that in mind when you show the projections, and don't show projections that, oh, next month we're going to double my revenues, because next month they're going to come and say, oh, how come you didn't double your revenues, right? So you want to keep that in mind, which I think first time around, we had very, very aggressive projections, and then they tried to use that to reduce the valuation of the company. And then if you have a buyer approaching you, and even if the buyer itself fully believe the story, fully believe there's an amazing synergy, and you yourself don't believe that, the synergy is probably not there. And at some point, someone will figure it out. So it might be, we had a couple of occasions where there was a person in the company that really fell in love with our company, so we got to acquire you guys. But eventually, someone, it might be the CEO, it might be the board, someone will come and say, and actually will come to you and say, can you really explain the synergies? What's the story over here? And if you don't have conviction on that, don't even go there. Don't waste time into going those guys into negotiation or due diligence, because if the synergies are not there and you don't believe they're there, it will not happen.
Yeah.
I was going to say, this is probably fairly obvious, but if you're picking for indies, if you've got a small company and there's a few owners in the company, make sure you're on the same page. Do you have an exit strategy, and what is that? All these things. It's good to know that you're all on the same page when you do get that inevitable offer to sell, because nothing can hold you up worse than one of the partners saying, I don't want to sell, and you want to sell. So make sure you guys are on the same page and in agreement with that.
Yeah, that's important, John. And I've seen it many times where there was one person that was sort of out of the loop, and they can cause all sorts of problems later on. And to Lior's point about projections, keep them keep them realistic, keep them conservative. You don't want them to be too tame, but you're going, if your process is going to take a while, and sometimes it does, that you're going to have to meet those objectives, meet those forecasts, and because they're going to ask as they go through their due diligence, they're going to ask, okay, how are you doing? Remember you told us back in January that you were going to do this number, and they go, yeah, well, things changed, and now you just got to keep, you got to keep on track there and make your numbers. And that's why it's important while you're going through the process to be focused on keeping your business running. All right, so what are we going to do? Wrap up. You've probably got about a few $1 million worth of advice just in the last 40 minutes. I mean, it's great advice from people who've been through it at least once, probably more times. Any questions? Derek?
When do you sell?
Well, I'll answer from our perspective. We sell because we're in Facebook. We're a small company, and we actually, even though people came to us, we were thinking about we needed partners to help us grow. We were finding it really hard with user acquisition and a lot of stuff. We wanted to focus on content creation. So for us, the answer to when to sell was once we had people talking to us, it was like, okay, we want to find a partner who can match what we want to do. So and for us, it was we felt the time to sell was to help us grow our business. Ironically, in the short term, it didn't work because RockU closed the studio down, but in terms of Kickstarter coming in for that team, it's worked out really well.
Go ahead.
You never know, right? In business school, they always teach you that everything's for sale for a price. It really depends on where you are in the evolution of the studio or the company that you're running. I've been part of great teams of people who, thought they wanted to be acquired, and at the end of the day, they really like their independence. It's becoming more difficult in the console space, obviously. So it really depends on what people's goals and objectives are, short-term and long-term. But with the valuations that some people are coming up with for some of these talented mobile teams, it's quite staggering. It would be pretty hard to say no if you thought the right opportunity were to present itself.
Yeah. First of all, it's a very difficult question, right? I think the way we're thinking about it, it's the right time to sell is a function of how the company is doing. So you want to sell when you're growing and showing nice growth, but obviously you don't want to sell too early. And the second component of that is the market conditions. So you don't want to miss the market. So in our case, the majority of our revenues were driven by Facebook applications, and we especially end of 2011, IGT acquired DoubleDown for $500 million. So the market became very, very, very active and very eager. Especially all the competitors of IGT were willing to pay a premium to acquire a competitor for DoubleDown. So we felt that the market was really ripe for us. In the same time, we saw, we have been moving more and more towards mobile, but we saw the market moving away from Facebook, and still that was the majority of our revenue. So we didn't want to miss the market. So we felt that although we still had room to grow as a company, the market conditions said that it's the right time for us to sell. So we want to balance those two things, and it's a very difficult decision.
And it's a really good question. The key, though, what not to do is don't sell on your way down. Sell while you're growing. That's when you're very valuable. If you need to sell, that's when your value decreases rapidly. Do it while you're successful. Do it while you're growing. Do it when the market's hot. The market is hot these days for all gaming companies in the mobile and online space. The multiples, as Michael said, the valuations are tremendous, and the activities are the activity level is very high. The other thing that's interesting right now is that you've got buyers coming to the market that have not traditionally bought in the games market. So Yahoo has done 3 or 4 deals in the last month and a half, 3 of those being gaming deals. Google is hiring people in the space and is looking in the space very actively. Amazon has made gestures that way. Warner Brothers and the other big media companies are moving into this space. So that creates a second wave of buyers to compete with the traditional Asian buyers that we've seen, like Tencent and Nexon and others, which will send the valuations up and the activity up. But you have to gauge, at some point, there's going to be a saturation of the market. For example, all of the big publishers have all the console talent they really need right now. Not true, Michael? True?
Absolutely true.
Yeah, so they're not buying console studios. They don't need to. They've got their talent, and that day is over.
I was just saying, one of my previous companies, Chrome Studios, I sold out of that in 2005, and after that I knew there was a number of offers to buy that company, and it was interesting because no one saw, and the GFC hit, and of course the shift from console to smartphone. So it was kind of sad that Chrome basically collapsed, even though they had these offers to sell, and then the flip side you had Halfbrick, who are a very small company, just sort of went from being, doing work for hire for THQ to becoming, the creators of Fruit Ninja and Jetpack Joyride. So there's a complete flip there with these two companies. So yeah, you'd look back now in hindsight that Chrome should have sold, if they knew the GFC was coming, just before that.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the big challenges with the larger developers, and Chrome is a good example. Same thing with Eurocom and others. When you become so dependent on these external contracts that are paying large groups of people an enormous sum of money, and you're making your money primarily on the margin, then it's a recipe for disaster. You really need to be planning out thoughtfully and trying to invest in your own intellectual property creation so that you can stand on your own if these buyers of your services are no longer there. Having run a small independent developer myself, we were taking lots of money from companies like DreamWorks and Disney and Fox and others, but at the end of the day, when those contracts and the direction of those organizations internally went in another direction, we were left holding the bag, and it changes a lot.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. Yeah, build the value in your company. Don't build the value in other people's. Recognize that. But sometimes it's necessary to take third-party contracts, but try to avoid that and stick with your own IP and your own.
So that's very difficult. Definitely Google, there's talks from Chanel Dio over Halfbrick about how they instigated that program. They looked at Google and did their Halfbrick Fridays, but there was a lot of effort. They strategically looked at how do we create our own IP, and that's paid off in spades for them. So definitely recommend Googling those from GDC talks and other talks and watch what they've said.
Any last questions from the group? Yeah. Can you repeat that? How important was the technology as part of the valuation? Own the technology? How valuable is it to own the technology?
That's a great question. There are a number of teams that have their own platforms and actually tried to service and license them out. Obviously, there are some fantastic middleware companies. You have Unity and others that are, allowing teams of people not to have to reinvent something. So I'm not so sure that the products, because of their life cycles being so different, that they are valued. It's more the intellectual property and the great game experience themselves. One of the last things I wanted to get across is best games win, period. I've been part of lots of really good games that didn't sell well. But I haven't been part of a lot of bad games that have done well. So regardless of whatever industry you're in, although I had a couple of those, and we won't go into those.
Which were they? No.
The very first Knockout Kings was not so good, but we got to build it again because we actually sold some units. But at the end of the day, it's all about the products.
Yeah.
It's about how you engage with your customers. It's how you retain them and the sort of monetization strategies that you have going forward. We're all sitting here today and in every room at this conference with our consoles in our pockets. Okay, just think about that. Just 10 years ago, could you imagine walking around with your Sony PlayStation or your Xbox or your Nintendo? So, the technology itself is ubiquitous. So it's all about the games. And anybody that doesn't believe that is fooling themselves. Best games win.
Yep, absolutely. It's been that way since the beginning.
Yep.
No question. Now, if you've got the technology to make great games, some way different that somebody needs, and you can leverage that, that'll be valuable too.
Yeah.
No question about it, but good advice. All right, we're going to wrap it up in a minute. Final comments or anything like that? If we got any more questions? No? Okay. Any final comments here?
Good.
Nope?
No, that's
All right, we're good. Thanks, guys.